Hello, everyone. It's Sue Tetzloff here with you today and fans of the framework. So excited to be talking about the topic of feedback. Those of you that know me know that this is one of my favorite topics to teach and mentor on is feedback. We call it direct dialogue in Capstone Leadership. But yeah, it's the topic of feedback. I want to start with a quote. It was out of a Harvard Business Review article, and I just think it's a great tee up to today's conversation about the failures we can have in giving feedback, and three common ones that we see when we're working around the country with leaders and employees on this topic. So this quote is, "The feedback process strikes at the tension between two core human needs: the need to learn and grow, and the need to be accepted just the way you are." That's a good one. The need to learn and grow and the need to be accepted just the way you are, that there's this tension between that. And this just, is what the feedback system is all about, is, the opportunity to learn and grow because of great feedback and honest feedback. And then, thinking that some feedback is stuff that we just don't want to hear because we don't want to change and we want to be accepted as we are. So love that quote. So in a high performance culture, an organization that is really striving for and attaining and always getting better, great results, those kind of things. So a high performance work culture, one of the elements in a culture like that we know, a tactic that is very useful in that culture is feedback. So feedback is really a form of communication, and communication is so linked with culture, right? So all of this conversation and communication, our language, what we say, how we say it, impacts our culture. And in particular, it impacts relationships, right? And so often when we teach this topic of feedback, we talk about how there's such a deep connection between communication and relationships. So it's kind of that chicken and the egg question, though, is do we have easy, great, wonderful communication with people or certain people because we have a great relationship with them? So it makes the communication and the conversation easy and, more powerful, etc. And then in those difficult, relationships, communication might struggle. But what came first? The communication struggle led to the difficult relationship, or did the difficult relationship lead to the communication struggle? It's usually, chicken and egg. We don't know what came first. They're so interconnected. And the people that study this, social scientists and psychologists and whatever, the people that study communication and relationships, they don't know what came first, right? They're so interconnected. They so play on each other. So we know that improving relationships, strengthening relationships with things like rounding, allows communication to be easier. And when we communicate better with people, that strengthens our relationship, right? So we can work on both sides of the coin, improve communication, improve relationships, improve communication. So, this is important in cultures where we want to be high performing and high achieving. This connection, these two related things, relationship and communication, are so key. And that may be why when we work with organizations in big transformational efforts and we see their success, we know that two of the biggest levers on that are some leadership tactics, some changes in how we lead around here related to relationship building, rounding folks, and communication, which includes feedback, folks, okay? So today the focus is on that feedback piece, and I want to connect it to this idea of how it can impact, how these failures in a communication technique of feedback, how a few common failures there can negatively impact relationships, okay? So it's not just about being bad at feedback, but understanding how it impacts results and progress, and in particular, how it impacts relationships. So that's the kind of the twist I'm going to put on it today, or the light I'm going to shine on it. So let's talk about failure number one. Failure number one is to inflate or overrate our feedback. So what do I mean by that? So have you ever been a new leader and got to know your employees? You've been there a little while, and then you're having maybe difficulty with a particular employee. Maybe you see a behavior that's chronic and persistent that's having a negative impact. Maybe you see something in their work performance that is not so great. Maybe it's a skill or a knowledge they should have and they don't have it, and you're wondering about the history of it, and you're observing this. And maybe you go down and you look in their personnel file and you look back at 1, 2, 3, 4 years of performance evaluations, written formal feedback, folks, and it rates the employee very high on these things that you're observing that are not so great, okay? And maybe you think to yourself, well, maybe this is a change. Maybe this is new behavior. Maybe they were always great, but they've fallen, or whatever. But the reality is likely, yeah, it's probably likely that whoever their leader was before was overrating, inflating the ratings, the formal feedback given to this employee. I've seen so many examples of this, folks. I've seen maybe you've done it yourself. Think about it. Have you ever, if there's a 1 to 5 or 1 to 6 rating scale, or maybe those things about meet standard, above standard, greatly above standard, where you push the envelope to the higher end of what might be real. Maybe you've inflated it a little bit. Maybe you rate it a little higher than what it really is. Why would we do that? Why would leaders do that? One is sometimes it's uncomfortable, right? We don't have the will to give honest feedback, to have the conversation, to record it formally, or even say it informally, right? So why would we do it? That's probably one of the reasons, right? Or maybe the system isn't very clear to really define those ratings. That might be a loophole that we say, yeah, we did that because we didn't understand the rating system or whatever. But the damage of this, folks, is that it reinforces the current level of behavior or performance. So when you inflate either formal or informal feedback, what you do is you reinforce the current level of behavior or performance. You don't elevate it. You're not giving feedback that will change it, that will give the person the opportunity to change it, okay? So that's one thing that is, really damaging from this. And I've seen it. I've seen it on a whole department scale. So this actually happened. A leader of a department was giving all of his employees high ratings on everything on the evaluation. And guess what? It was linked to a merit pay system. So it also gave them big raises. And guess what? Those were all inflated ratings for the most part. And there was a huge disconnect between the results of the department, which were way down here, and how each individual was rated and how they were performing. How can you have a department that has some of the worst results, patient satisfaction, in the bottom 1 percentile of the country, meaning 99% of hospitals score better than them? Huge variances in their expenses in finance, huge problems on surveys with citations, the biggest turnover rate of employees, the lowest satisfaction rate of employees in the building. Yet every employee in that department, year after year, once it was discovered and looked into, year after year, those employees were receiving high rankings inflated, embellished, overrated rankings as their feedback. So why would they change? And why would that in turn improve the results of their department? So guys, this has huge impact on individuals and whether or not they get better and improve. But when we embellish or overinflate feedback, it also can create wide sweeping impact on the performance of the department where that employee works. So feedback is a huge helpful tool for leaders to master, right? To master. But what's the impact on the relationship piece of this, right? So I want to connect that communication, feedback is a form of communication, with relationships. So if I'm a leader who is embellishing, overrating, inflating the feedback that I'm giving my individual employees, you know what? They're smart people. They're going to know it's not honest. They're going to know it's not fair, right? So when we overinflate, when we don't give honest feedback, the receiver of that is going to know that Sue is giving me feedback that is not honest. And so what happens to that relationship and trust? You know, maybe you think, wow, they're thankful that I gave them this really glowing performance evaluation and said they're behaving above and beyond our standards. Their job task performance is above and beyond standards. But if they know, and usually employees or people are the biggest critics of themselves, right? We're harder on ourselves than others. So I probably know that I have some issues and what my issues are. Maybe not, but I probably do. But especially if it's, pointed out in a formal feedback conversation and my leader says, wow, Sue, you're great at this, and I know I'm not. And there's this disconnect that can damage the relationship because it impacts trust. Because what I'm saying in the form of inflated feedback is truly, it's dishonest. And relationships don't flourish when there's distrust. And here's an example of it. And maybe we've never thought about it. And people say this to us a lot in our partner organizations. We see on the employee engagement survey that there's this distrust issue. Well, there's lots of places you can look to see what those issues are, but maybe your feedback is a place to start. And maybe some of those relationships that are distrustful is because of inflated feedback. Okay, so what's the solution for that is, of course, the tactic of direct dialogue, compliment, coach, correct, and being honest, being truthful about that feedback, not embellishing, not inflating it because we're uncomfortable. So having the will and mastering the skill of giving honest feedback. So that goes back to that quote that I started with, is that when we give honest feedback, there's this tension between, the need to learn and grow, because feedback can help us do that, and also to be accepted as we are. So, but we need to have the will and the skill to have that feedback system, whether it's a compliment, positive coaching, or correction that is based on honesty and builds trust. And then it also builds performance and improvement, which is what you want in a high-performing organization. As a leader, is that not your job? Is to develop your people and improve your results. So in a nutshell, and feedback is one of the number one ways, great skill you can use to do that, okay? So the number two problem or failure that we see in feedback is saying nothing. So number one problem is inflating or overrating the feedback, which reinforces bad or lower performance than it needs to be. But number two is saying nothing. So yeah, why would we not say anything? We're the leader and we see maybe behavior or performance that's below standard or has the opportunity to get better, and we say nothing. Often It's either a lack of skill, a lack of will, or both. That's why we use that term, muster the will and master the skill. You got to do this, folks, okay? So saying nothing. Now, we like to do an exercise in some of our trainings, whether it's with our partners or at our summit or when we're doing on-site specialized training, where we'll have leaders kind of do a little assessment about the traps they fall into that cause them to say nothing. So, you know, it might be a trap of, well, what if I'm wrong? Maybe I'll watch it longer. Or what if I say something and it makes it worse and not better? Or last time I said something, you know, it was really uncomfortable and it didn't lead to an improvement anyway. So, you know, I'm going to just pick my battles. Well, they're a great clinicians, so I don't think I should speak up about their behavior. So there's these all kind of traps that we fall into that cause us to say nothing. And so what's the problem with that is that, again, we rob people of the opportunity to improve, right? So their behavior and their performance stays the same. So if we want to be an organization where we believe that we're always, and we're working towards always getting better and better and better, saying nothing doesn't help us with that cause, okay? But saying nothing actually to that person, you know, robs them of that opportunity to learn and grow. But actually, part of this failure too sometimes is the leader says nothing to that person who needs to hear the feedback, but they say it to somebody else. Oh yeah, right? So you've heard and seen this too in your career. I know you maybe been subject to it where somebody had some feedback to give to you and they didn't come to you and give it to you, but you learned that they've talked about it to many other people. This happens. How can that be good for your culture, your organizational culture, right? And how can that be good for relationships, right? How can that be positively strengthening and building relationships if we withhold feedback from the people who need to hear it? And even worse, if we talk about that issue with other people and not the person who needs to hear that. You know, sometimes I think that's kind of what sets up internal candidates for promotions. It sets them up for not being the best candidate, and sometimes outside candidates get, you know, promoted or get the job, right, that maybe internal candidates wanted. You know, that might be an impact of feedback that needs to go to one person, but it goes to all these other people. And it's damaging, right? Because we know that human nature is that negativity screams at us and positivity only whispers. So if we have a situation where somebody is, you know, I'm a leader and one of my peers, I have some feedback related to, you know, their behavior or performance that I'm aware of or witnessed, and I should give them feedback on that, but instead I withhold it from them because I'm uncomfortable having the conversation with them, but I share that with 5 other people. You know, have you noticed that so-and-so does this? Or did you hear they did that? Could you believe they did that? This kind of stuff happens in organizations, right? We know it does. And again, the damage is you rob the person who needed that feedback from the opportunity to get it, to hear it, to learn and grow from it maybe. But you've also maybe damaged the credibility of that individual by, you know, venting or sharing that information with the people, you know. So feedback, for it to be powerful, needs to be given to the person who needs to hear it and not to everybody else, okay? So, yeah, and of course, the damage to that on the relationship is lack of respect. So if I'm a leader that withholds feedback, from an employee and robs them from the opportunity to grow and develop, that employee could lose respect. So I expect as an employee working for my boss, when I think about the last boss I worked for, I gave him a lot of respect for being willing to give me feedback, to coach me, to commit to coaching me, etc. That garnered a lot of respect. Right? It didn't damage our relationship. It strengthened it, that he did not withhold that from me. Because truly it's a major responsibility of leaders is to grow and develop the individuals and the team collectively. And if I withhold that as a leader, you know, I can damage my relationship with my employees, because it can mean that I don't care about carrying out that responsibility. I don't care about their growth and development. I'm not willing to invest my time and energy and maybe a little discomfort to do that. And when we're willing to do it, then we can garner respect in that relationship. So the absence of it can diminish respect in the relationship, and the ability to do it, the willingness to do it, and learning how to do it right can improve the relationship by increasing that respect. That I respect, you know, my boss respects me enough, cares about me enough, that he or she's willing to have these conversations with me and invest in me and coach and mentor me and give me feedback, etc. Okay? So the major tactic here is to muster the will and master the skill of giving feedback, whether that's compliments. Again, we shouldn't even withhold compliments. I'm not just talking about feedback of criticism or critique, but even, you know, withholding feedback of compliments. You know, it's damaging to the relationship. So giving feedback, good or bad, constructive, is something that can improve the relationship, and it can damage the relationship if it's not there. So number 3, failure in feedback, is the first 2 were about being on the giving end of feedback. Okay. So now let's talk about being on the receiving end of feedback and one failure related to that. So if you're the receiver of feedback, maybe from your boss, maybe from a peer, maybe if you're a leader, even from your employee, and that's a great person that you should get feedback from, is your employees. If you're a leader, you want feedback from your employees, not just your boss. And yes, from your peers, that's nice, but from your employees, that's awesome if they're willing to give you feedback. I had a wise mentor many years ago, a CEO that I worked for really early in my career, that said to me, you know, Sue, the higher you go up the ladder in leadership, the more unlikely it is that somebody's going to give you honest feedback. Okay? So what he really mentored me about was ask for it. So solicit it, but also be so grateful if somebody gives it to you unsolicited. So solicit it, and also, you know, embrace any unsolicited feedback. Okay? So if you want to think about being the receiver of feedback, let's say it's feedback that's constructive, that maybe somebody sees something, an opportunity for me to grow and develop in my leadership, whether that's in my behaviors or my skills or my knowledge. If somebody has that feedback for me, it's a gift. You know, feedback is a gift, and I should receive it well. Right? I should receive it well. It's like patient complaints. We say that, you know, in the world of, you know, patient satisfaction and safety, is that when people speak up about a problem, an issue, a concern, whether it's related to the service aspects of the patient experience or the safety quality of their care, when they speak up, that is a gift. And we should receive it well, learn from it, and use it for good. Now, you know, sure, we have to sort out, you know, what's noise, what's, you know, what's, you know, stuff that isn't real, etc. You know, everything, every piece of feedback isn't going to be something that, you know, you probably have to change your world for, but, you know, don't dismiss feedback. Listen to it, receive it well. It's kind of like getting that, you know, at Christmas time, maybe you get 10 gifts. and maybe a couple people were way off on, not knowing you well and what you do or don't like, or, what your real needs are or whatever. But still you should receive all gifts well, right? You should be a good receiver of gifts. People will stop giving them, right? So the idea is to be a great receiver of these gifts that come in the form of feedback, whether it's solicited or unsolicited. So what are the ways that we can get feedback? Well, to solicit feedback is during leader rounding. That's a great way, asking that question, how can I improve my leadership, when you round with employees. And some leaders shy away from that question, or if the employee says, oh, nothing, we just drop it at that, but maybe getting more specific in the question of, being specific about a recent change. Hey, that recent change that was made in our department, and my role was this, and this as your leader. How did that go for you? How did I do with that? Did I miss anything? What feedback can you give me, etc., about, my role in that? Or, I just put out the Christmas schedule. How did I do with that? Whatever. So, being specific in those questioning might be a good way to start versus asking those broad, open-ended questions, or maybe going back and forth. I used to do that when I would round every month with my employees. I would change up the question and be very general and broad about, my leadership and what I could do to improve and solicit feedback on a general way, open-endedly. Or I might get specific. So every other month, maybe going back and forth. But when you ask that question, listen, just digest what was said. Don't get defensive. Don't get argumentative. Seek to understand. Can you tell me more about that? Can you give me a real example? Those kind of things. But don't get defensive when you ask, because next time you ask the question, nope, they're not going to answer, right? Same thing with unsolicited feedback. If somebody comes to you and they're brave enough, they have the will to come to you and say, hey, Sue, I've noticed, right? You need to thank them. Listen, seek to understand, receive it well, or guess what? They're not coming back, right? They're not coming back to give you more. So, and how can it impact the relationship if you don't receive it well? So when you think about, even like receiving a physical gift and you don't receive it well, people don't want to give it again in the future. And they think, what is it about Sue that she just, doesn't receive gifts well? Well, same thing with feedback is, what will happen with the relationship is there'll be this tension there, that there's this inability for us to have conversations about things that aren't positive, that are constructive, and things like that. So now the relationship might get pretty superficial. We only talk about things that are positive, and we're not willing or able to go in our relationship to those, difficult conversations. And so that usually is not good for a long-term relationship or a healthy, thriving relationship, is to have kind of that superficial kind of conversation and ability to interact with each other. So, okay, guys, 3 big failures. On the giving end, inflating or overrating people's performance or behavior, whether that's when we give them a compliment, whether that's when we give them positive coaching, or when we're constructive, we just overinflate it. We dance around it, we embellish it, whatever. And the bad part is it damages our relationship because it's dishonest, and it damages the ability to create, an ever-improving individual and ever-improving results in our team and our department and our organization. Number 2, to sum this up, is saying nothing, avoiding it, or not saying it to the person who needs to hear it, but saying it to other people. And of course, that certainly, doesn't allow people the opportunity to improve. It keeps them at their current level of behavior performance, which might be below standard or may not be the best it can be. And then also what that does is creates, an impact of disrespect in the relationship. And number 3 is on the receiving end is not receiving it well. And so then by not receiving it well, people want to stop giving it to you. So now you cut off your ability to learn and grow. and you kind of diminish this relationship to being very superficial with the individuals who you cut off from being able to have these kind of conversations with you because you did not receive them well. So 3 big failures in feedback that as individuals, whether we're givers and receivers, and we always are, both, is that we try to overcome these 3 failures. And so we hope that you'll, maybe pull a pearl from this, maybe start with one thing where you say, wow, I'm going to do this different or better starting today. Just start. That is our mantra. So also for, just to close this out too, if you want more resources on this topic, in particular in our book, The Employee Experience, we have a whole chapter on direct dialogue. In our e-learning platform, Capstone EDU, we have a whole e-learning course. Learn, do, videos, practice, do this. And that e-learning course in Capstone EDU on direct dialogue is a great resource for that. We have an upcoming summit in Eaton Rapids in October. And one of the topics there at that live training event is this very topic of direct dialogue. And certainly if your organization is interested in a partnership with us where all of your leaders learn this, as well as many other things that create a high performance work culture and transformational results, that's the all-in kind of approach. And we love our 20+ partners out there that have been all in on improving their culture, including their culture of feedback, and overcoming these failures and really using a tactic such as this to get great, even award-winning, top-ranking results. So it's part of the package of what we call the leadership bundle. So if you want information about any of those things I just mentioned, it is all on our website, capstoneleadership.net. Find us there. You can book a call to talk about options for learning more, digging in more, making these kind of transformational things happen in your leadership or in your organization. You can find out how to buy our book or sign up for Capstone EDU or come to one of our events, but all that information is for you there at capstoneleadership.net. Have a great rest of your day and week, folks, and we'll see you next time.